Great. Thank you all for joining today. We're going to be discussing 5 tools to understand the quality of your Microsoft Teams calls and meetings. The agenda for today is a quick introduction of myself and my colleague, a quick look at the quality of experience, a quick look at quality defined, and 5 Microsoft native tools, as well as Modality's offering of teamwork analytics. Quick introduction. To my virtual left is my colleague and friend Tom Arbuthnot. Tom, quick intro.
Yeah, hey everybody, Tom Arbuthnot, Principal Solutions Architect at Modality, and look after products and deal with some of our strategic customers.
Yep. And I am Sean Murphy. I'm a technical product owner and a managing consultant at Modality, working alongside Tom in our product and solution sphere. A quick discussion on good versus bad experience, just to set the scene. Typical user experience in terms of good and bad. Is the person able to call another person? Are they able to join meetings? Sometimes they cannot. There's challenges joining meetings. We're all aware of them. It's always a bad experience. Can we get natural conversation? Do we get interrupts? Do we get setup failures? Do we get mid-call drops? Are there interruptions as part of the call? Sometimes it's difficult to hear people. There's echo, there's noise. Sometimes people are talking at the same time. And then from a video perspective, what can that person see? Is it well? Is there any black spots? Is there any drops? Any problems with video? Sometimes it can be asynchronous and blurry. Can we present in the meeting? Are we confident presenting? Does the tiles scale correctly? Sometimes we're behind, sometimes we're lagging in terms of the presenter. All of these things really attribute to a good and bad experience. Really, can they focus on the conversation, the task at hand? Or are they distracted by the technology? And what's the impact of that in terms of experience? So today, myself and Tom are talking about looking at quality of performance around Teams, network issues, impacting performance, telephony experiences, and really focusing around the optimum devices for Teams as well. Quick check in terms of what Microsoft deem quality of experience. Different segments here on the left are around the metrics and user experience, the customer responsibility and Microsoft's responsibility. You can see there's a segment which is obviously Teams is an offering from Microsoft, the SaaS offering. So there's that service element, the 365 service. But internally, in terms of customer responsibility, there's endpoints, there's devices, there's network, and then they're broken down into impacting areas. So audio, in terms of statistics on good, poor, break down into metrics by building and networks. Is it VPN? Is it TCP? Is it over proxy? Using the correct port ranges. Reliability, call setup drops, learning where they attribute to, rate my call, or as it's called, user feedback now in Teams, learning about the end user perception of quality and the experience that they're having and correlating that to the impact. And then devices, so typically around headsets, microphones, speakers, are using the right Wi-Fi drivers, are things patched correctly? And then looking at clients, so client versions, are using more mobile, are using more desktop client? Where's the impact in terms of Wi-Fi attributed to different client versions? That's really what Microsoft are talking about in terms of quality of experience. And it's really important to pay attention to the customer responsibility and the Microsoft responsibility. So Microsoft defined this really, and from a quality perspective, in 2 sections: service metrics and user experience. Service metrics are typically around, very network terms here, but jitter, packet loss, round trip and reliability, drop and setup failures, devices and drivers. They're all metric driven sort of attributes that you can look at. And then on the other side is the user experience. So do I know how to use the service? Is it intuitive? Can I get my job done? What's the perception? Did I have a bad call? Am I able to set up and maintain that call? So really, quality is about joining these 2 areas together. So I'm just going to take a quick tour on usage reporting for us. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I guess we can go through 5 tools that are in the box, completely included in your pricing, that are definitely worth looking at. We're talking about meetings and calls, but the first thing to understand is anybody even using Teams? How are they using it? So we're going to look at quality, but before we look at quality, we want to look at, is it being used as fully as it could be? First place for usage is the M365 Admin Center. So there you get a whole lot of trend reports on all your M365 products, so SharePoint, Yammer, OneDrive, etc., and of course Teams. If you haven't seen this recently, they've added lots of additional stats. So they've got meeting participants, meeting organised, total meetings organised, one-time scheduled recurred meetings. So lots of detail on who's using tools, and you can use this to understand how well is our meetings and calling being used. Moving on from that, you also have Microsoft 365 usage analytics. The naming is very overlapping here, but these are Microsoft's Power BI reports based on usage. They're quite interesting to click through. They extend off of the M365 Admin Center. There's a link there on how to set them up, but they are less detailed than those other reports. So they're useful to give you a visual, but actually they don't go down into the same level of depth that web reports do. So for Teams, this is nice to have, but probably not the primary tool for usage. And the final one for usage is the Teams Admin Center, and this is probably where I spend most of my time if I cared about Teams usage in particular. So you get to see lots more detail here about media. So you can see PSDN usage, you can see live event usage, and if you can see on the side there, again, you get the same sorts of attributes as in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So I can see how many calls are being done, how many meetings are being done, and that's a really useful place to start, because when you're looking at quality, you want to know that, first of all, who's using the tool to make sure that it's being used as fully as it should be, and then driving up quality and performance for those users. So that's the first one of 5, that is looking at usage reporting. Number 2 is all about end user reactive support. So this is the help desk gets a call and someone says they've had a bad experience. The main tool there is what was called Call Analytics, and still is called Call Analytics, sometimes by Microsoft, but it's essentially in the Teams Admin Center. If you go and look up an individual user and all their settings, there's a tab called Meetings and Calls, and within that tab you get a call history of every session they're involved in, so both meetings and calls. And it's a useful tool, so someone brings up the help desk, says they had a bad call, even if they don't know quite when it was, you can scan through their recent calls, click in, and you can get things like their endpoint, the device they were used, network performance, codecs used, and it'll also give you some helpful hints around what might have caused the issue. So in this screenshot, it's called out network quality was poor. What's useful on this is you can see not just the user, but the people involved in the session. So if it was a meeting of 50 people, the person reporting the issue may well not be the person that had the network issue or caused the issue. So quite often when you're dealing with individual user complaints, you want to look into that report and see which of the users had a poor experience. Also, what devices were being used. Often the network can be good, but the device might have been poor. So they may be, if the presenter was on PC mic and speakers, for example, you may get reports of bad audio that are nothing to do with the network. So useful for per user, but no trending here, no proactive alerting here. This is just reactive support. Moving forward now to organizational level. So this is trend. So now we're not looking at individual users as much as we're looking at the entire environment. And the first tool, and this has been the classic tool for quite a while, is CQD. So Call Quality Dashboard. This is Microsoft's tool to aggregate all of the details of your environment in terms of calls and meetings and give you summary reports. It's a web-based tool. You can filter by location, subnet. You can slice and dice the data in all sorts of ways. It is a useful tool, but something has superseded it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you can go in and use those summary reports without much config other than uploading your subnets, and they are an interesting starting point. But what superseded that is the CQD Power BI reports. So honestly, from my point of view, I wouldn't spend too much time on the CQD dashboard, the web-based reports. They do have their fans, but they are fairly complicated. But in the CQD, let me see, CQD Power BI reports, that is where there is loads and loads of power. So these are Microsoft Power BI reports. For those not familiar with Power BI, that's Microsoft's big data analytics reporting tool, and it's incredibly powerful. Microsoft have written these reports. They connect directly to the CQD data, but all the interface and the interaction is in PowerBI.com. So I'm not going to go through report by report because that would be a whole webinar in its own right. But in terms of some of the highlights, they have auto attendant and call queue history reporting. That's a really common ask in customers. They want to know what's going on with call queues and auto attendant queue times, etc. And that's a data set that is only really found in CQD and Power BI. They have a help desk report, so that's similar to the help desk scenarios we talked about previously, but now you can look a single user up and try and escalate them up into what are the common denominators of their issue. So is it just that issue, or is it just that user, sorry, or is it the entire building? You can do a lot of location reports, so looking at subnets, looking at Wi-Fi networks, etc. Mobile device specific report. This is becoming increasingly popular conversation. How are people doing specifically on mobile devices? How are they doing on Wi-Fi on mobile? And there is a dedicated direct routing report as well, where we're looking at PSTN calls. So each of these report packs has multiple pages, and you can drill in from top level reports right down to some detail.
Yeah, it's good to remember that there's 8 in total, and Microsoft are, recently, I think only a few months ago, announced the auto attendant and call queue. So they, slipped in terms of on Microsoft Docs, but they're very new in terms of the other 6 were, I think, in probably for well over a year now. But yeah, there's 8 in total. I think my favorite, I'd say, Tom, is probably the summary report. It's a drill down, very interactive report, looks at each audio type and video type, peer-to-peer, conference, etc., and really goes into some of the rate my call information as well, which is I find really useful. But to Tom's point, this is where Microsoft move away from the more web embedded Teams admin center out the box to something that is extensible and almost tangible to create your own reports and hook back into the cube and extending other APIs, etc.
Yeah, if you're an admin of Teams in any respect, or a service owner of Teams, I mean, these are in the box and included in the pricing. They absolutely should be installed and looked at, and they're not particularly difficult to install. Again, we won't go through the steps on the webinar. The documentation is very good, but here you can have a quick look. You install this connector, you download a zip with the files, you can upload them to PowerBI.com, and from that point they're just a PowerBI.com URL, so they're totally easy to share out to your environment as well. There are some challenges around them. They particularly affect large customers or people wanting to do complex reporting. So they are using a direct query refresh. So every time you load the page, it's loading the data from the database. The data is not cached in the Power BI service. So in some large environments, it can take tens of seconds to refresh each report. So it can be a slow experience. We do see some customers that are large end up taking screenshots to do summary reports and things because they can't navigate the reports in real time. You've got Microsoft's data to play with, but they've decided how they're going to slice and dice and rate that data. So you can query that to an extent and do your own reports to an extent, but you can't change the shape or structure of the data. And you can build your own reports, but you're limited to how Microsoft structured the data in the first place, their PII rules around how long they store PII or not, their retention policies. So for what you get in the box, it's great. The built-in reports are very good. If you know Power BI, you can absolutely use the connector and start doing some reports. But if you start trying to get very clever with reporting, you might find you hit some limitations in terms of how much data you can refresh into the file. You can hit resource exceed limitations because Microsoft will cap how much you can do with that data set as well. So from out of the box point of view, that is where product-wise, you would spend most of your time. But if you want to get slightly more advanced, there might be some challenges there. And number 5, if you're really technical, is the call records API. So this is the fire hose of all the session details after the meeting or call has completed, and it is after the call. So it's not during the call, so it's not a live API, but it comes usually just minutes after the call's ended. So a continuous flow of data. It's webhook and JSON files that get spat out at you. You could absolutely write a script or do some development in-house to collect this data. It is quite complicated from a Dev point of view, but it's definitely achievable. There's an example I've linked there from Lee Ford, who's a great MVP who's written a script for pulling PSTN call records. So that's like PSTN bill records from the call records API. And there's a link there to the documentation. So this is the API that all third-party tools will be using for Teams. So anybody that reports on Teams will be pulling from this API. You absolutely could do it yourself. Some things to consider are just the support and complexity of that. And that nicely ties us into what Modality are doing. So everything we've talked about up to this point is out of the box and free, and you certainly should have a look at those things first. But now Sean will take us through where we're adding value, or we think we're adding value beyond what's in the box.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. So Teamwork Analytics is our product name, as Tom was just discussing around the Graph API. Really what we're doing is we're leveraging Microsoft's Graph API in a structure and developing based on that API. It's all held in Azure. There are multiple deployment options. We offer what we call a CAT, Customer Azure Tenant Deployment. As a cloud solution provider, we also offer a CAT, but something that we can manage and subscribe to and look after on your behalf. And we offer a SaaS hosted model in tenant. So we effectively will hold the structure of our Teamwork Analytics product, and we will effectively host all the data and the product construct within. The middle tier is really about what we're delivering there. So we have broken down Teamwork Analytics into 3 group areas. So we have usage, which is all about driving usage of chat messages, team messages, calls and meetings. It's all about, actionable insights and driving adoption effectively. And we have governance, which is around Teams governance, security and control, demonstrating compliance and adhering to policies in Teams. So making sure, your Teams channels are correct in terms of naming structure. You have the right amount of Teams owners. And really all of those are driven into PowerBI reports. And then performance, so very much apt in terms of what we're talking about today. We have a performance element of TWA, which is all around the very typical service metrics that I was discussing at the beginning, as well as quality metrics, reliability metrics, and user feedback. And then to the right is one of our key features, example of we're leveraging automation. So we're using the API construct. We're in the middle tier, getting the data into a usable and tangible reporting and analytics form. And then we're adding capability on top. So automation is one of our key features at the moment. And this is really about driving the efficiency and the mean time to get information to end users. We can take different elements of the data and automate information to end users. Example would be, did you know your video usage is low? Try and adopt more video. Or it could be you're using an uncertified device. Try flipping to a certified device list. Here's a list of devices to choose from. Or it can be informational. So number of guests per Teams is low. The last activity was 30 days, 60 days ago. Consider archiving the Teams channel. On top of that, we offer a service. So we have a customer intelligence team, a team that I look after. It's optional. It's really about SMEs and consultants who've been in the field, who understand data, who understand the complexity of performance, understand usage and understand governance. And they're really experts who are looking through the data and leveraging the product to give insights and engage with you as a customer. So the way we do that is we do quarterly reviews, or on a tactical basis. It could be as you're going through migration, or you're going through certain problems in your organization. You can employ this customer intelligence team, and we'll engage, interpret the data, and provide workshops and engage with feedback and highlight sessions around the data. Performance is really broken down into all of the areas: calls, conferencing, video, audio, sharing. We're really taking everything that the API structure brings us, and very much like CQD, we're looking at all of the main components that Microsoft derive from quality. So there's nothing new there in terms of we're looking at the same metrics, same API structure. And we're basing that all around Azure, the model of CSP in Azure tenant as customer deployed or as a SaaS offering, and really layering that service layer on top. So you might ask, how do we compare to CQD? Our reports aren't web-based, so as Tom was saying, there's Teams Admin Center, there's web-based reports there. We're leveraging Power BI. We're doing direct queries. Power BI is, if I flip ahead really quick, Power BI is Microsoft's leading platform for analytics and business intelligence. Just recently, there was a Magic Quadrant report from Gartner that came out in terms of their leaders, in terms of vision and ability to execute. I think that's about 14 years consecutively they've been positioned in that way. We leverage Power BI heavily, so we have in our development and solutions team dedicated Power BI and data architects who are living in data day in, day out. If I flip back, really that's where the second line of Power BI reports are at our strongest. We can trend, so very much like CQD, you get 5, 7, 30, 60, 90 days. We can retain the data. We own that data post Graph API, so we have a structure which I'll go through in terms of the Azure architecture briefly, but effectively we can trend up to any customizable requirement. We're cached, as Tom said, so we have what we call cold, warm, and hot path reporting, and we can get the report from API into report in sub 1 minute. We tested that at scale for a 300,000 seat customer, millions of records a day, and have performance statistics around that. We've also got Power BI alerting, so we're leveraging all the capability that Microsoft have in their Power Platform. So there's automation elements, there's flow, there's alerting capabilities as well that we leverage. And as I was discussing, there's automation, which is one of our key features. We can email or direct message into channel. There's so many variables there with automation. We have our own custom scoring as well. So Microsoft have a good, poor threshold. We have a very simplistic 1 to 10, what we call a modality stream score. So we're looking at the metrics that attribute up to poor calls and making it very easy and digestible for exec all the way down to operational level to look at high level trends and where the perceived quality versus where the actual quality is based on that score. We have integrated AD, so much like what we were talking about earlier in terms of the Power BI CQD report and the extensibility. We had some challenges there where we tried to integrate alongside the connector AD APIs, because we were very much interested in getting departmental and leveraging attributes like title and country. We can do this in Teamwork Analytics. We have the scale of Azure, and we can pull in multiple API constructs alongside the Graph API. So that's very much something that we're doing across all of our Teamwork Analytics products. And we can hold data, so really retention, but also being selective. So we could selectively remove PII, or we can hold PII information dependent on different countries, groups, etc. A bit of a view on the architecture. Really, it's broken down into different areas. There's a webhook, there's a querying service, processing service, and then it effectively alongside all of that are Azure functions. There's web buses and hooks into the Graph API subscriptions that are leveraged. And then we process into the database layer. And then we have a reporting layer, which we call cold, warm, and hot, effectively meaning we get aggregate data, and then we get warm data, which can be up to 35 days. And then we get hot data, which is the fastest data. So it's effectively straight into cache and data that we can leverage for quick response, like alerting. Yep, previously talking about Power BI, really important factor for us was leveraging Microsoft's Power BI platform. And yeah, all of the whole product base is based on Power BI. Really strong for us. We've seen huge value from a customer perspective, just loads of feedback in terms of how interactive Power BI is, the drill through features, the dashboarding, how accessible it is on mobile, and within downloaded reports into PowerPoint, drill throughs and into Excel and exports. It's really rich in terms of pinning visuals, and from a user perspective has been really powerful. Some of the examples for performance, some of our previous examples are around statistics. So, everything is based on high-level usage, total, durations, and subnets. And then we're going down into more detailed level of client details by version, by type, looking very much like CQD in terms of summary of statistics of poor calls, how they change, and the trend of that, and making comparisons. Down to site level in terms of what Microsoft are adhering to in terms of the metric values around packet loss and jitter. Site to site, so how does one site compare to another site? What's the relational differences between poor and good, between subnet A to subnet B, or region A to region B, to derive internal issues. Session details, so down to per user level information as well. And it's all AD based, so we can do internal mapping to your subnets, but also we can leverage Active Directory, so we can leverage region, country, departmental information. Touching on one of the features was automation. So really this is native to the Microsoft service. It's rule based, so we have, using the structure, the usual structure earlier, we have full accessibility and control from a database perspective to create any query function and join any scenario, basically. So, example of scenarios for performance at the moment are tips for improving Wi-Fi. So identifying where, from a report perspective, instead of, looking at it and reacting to it, it's really the proactive element. So it's knowing that there is low quality, it's knowing that X user had low quality, and it's knowing that they had Wi-Fi. So it's triggered based on that scenario, and really it's a sweet shop of variables and options that we can derive to get to a high level of quality and improve quality, fix problems, find problems, and maximize that investment in teams and be as proactive as possible. Our roadmap, we're in Q1 at the moment. We've deployed this to a 300,000 user seat customer. We are scale test. We've collected and stored the data. We've done all of our dev, very stereotypical R&D and soak testing, and performance tested the records at scale using the API and all of those functions. We've got anonymization, so one of our largest scale customers had a requirement very much for removing certain fields and attributes, so that is currently in the product. And we're working on V1 reporting, so very much in the earliest stages of reporting, very much looking and engaging with customers. Myself as a product owner, really looking for user stories and feedback, and ways in which the market and the customer base would like to see data, and from a quality perspective, what's the most important thing for you. Our modality scoring is also part of Q1, so this is a USP from one of our previous products, but the ease of scoring we found to be highly valuable. So instead of being very network and maybe too techy, the one to score value range for a modality scoring we found to have huge feedback. So it's something we've included in Q1, but reporting is our main focus. As we move out into Q2, Q3 and Q4, these are all future candidates. Automation is somewhere between Q1 and Q2 at the moment. We have scenarios, we have the data structure, we have the bots triggering. We're just looking to build out that story further and looking for customer base to help us build out more scenarios that you will find valuable and proactive to your needs. And then as we go out into Q3, Q4, we're looking at other elements of service health around Microsoft 365, and Q4 we're looking at proactive testing and potentially some benchmarking against what we call collective intelligence. So looking at how one organisation may compare to another organisation from a quality perspective. All future candidates. I think that brings us to the top of the hour. With 5 minutes to spare, perfectly, Tom.
Yeah, we've got a few questions in the chat that are probably worth addressing. So someone asked about the real-time reporting. There's been lots of questions in the market about real-time reporting. So Microsoft have just announced they're going to add some real-time stats for meetings to the Teams Admin Center. That's due around June time. As it stands, the APIs from Microsoft don't give real-time data. It is post-call. We do see some people presenting that they have real-time dashboards because they're getting the data from the API to a dashboard very quickly. But I mean, that's still a minutes after the call to be pedantic about real-time. So hopefully with real-time in-call reporting coming into the Teams Admin Center, that will come to the Graph APIs at some point. If you've got that requirement, it's worth pushing feedback to us or to Microsoft because they're logging who's interested in that.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I'm really interested to hear about the real-time story and use case. To Tom's point, we're Microsoft partners and on a TAP program, so it's the immediate question post Ignite was to find out if that's something that's going to be part of the API contract. So very much interesting to hear more on that from a customer perspective.
There was a question on where's the data stored. So that's a very hot topic for lots of our customers, particularly at the moment with all the regulatory requirements. So this tool is written to be run on Azure. We can run it as SaaS, and it's single instance SaaS, so it's not a multi-tenant type solution. So it's deployed with an ARM template. So if you want us to run it for you, we can pick which Azure region it goes into. If the customer wants to run it on their tenant, which is definitely a valid option, then you can choose where you put it Azure-wise. Some of the data is hydrated into the PowerBI.com service, so depending on where your M365 tenant is, then the data will be in PowerBI.com as well. But if you go with the customer Azure tenant model where you deploy it yourselves, then you control the entire data and environment, the RBAC, everything. So SaaS, if you want an easier life, you just connect PowerBI.com to our service, or customer Azure tenant if you want to have ultimate control over where the data is, who has access to it, audit logs of everything that's ever happened with it can all live 100% on your tenant.
I'd say our most popular at the moment is customer Azure tenant for that exact reason, isn't it? It's the control aspect and the compliance, and yeah, that seems to be the most favourable.
Cool, just skimming through the questions. If anybody else has any other questions, throw them into the chat. There were some fairly complex ones in the chat as well, so we might go one-to-one on some of those questions. Someone's asked, can automation be scheduled and can we add our logo? Great question. Yeah, we automate adaptive cards, so you can potentially change how the adaptive card looks and feels. We have a default that we support, but changing things like the name or the icon or the description of the app is possible in the manifest, and it's a use case that keeps coming up, so we're interested to see if we need to support that. Microsoft have just tapped a feature for changing those within your environment, so it is a common ask, and you can think of the automation as basically SQL queries and adaptive cards, and you can control both. So you can control exactly which scenario is enabled, exactly how the triggers work, and if you want to have your own adaptive cards, there's a Microsoft designer to build those. So lots of our customers have very specific comms in terms of how they want to say things, what they want to say. There's obviously cultural implications there, there's language implications there, so absolutely you can change those triggers and change those use cases, and you can also get very selective on targeting as well. Because we have all the AD data, you could target only people in a certain country by AD country, or only people of director and higher or director and lower. So you can get quite specific in both your comms and your targeting for those automations. A few questions on live events. Live events, there is some data in the Teams Admin Center, but I don't think there's anything through the call records API, Sean, unless you correct me.
No,
So,
you're 100%. Yeah, nothing in the call records. I think Microsoft, I can't remember in roadmap, keep me honest, have just announced something coming into preview for more diagnostic data, so more performance data for live events. I think that's coming through maybe next month, I'm going to say, or maybe a month after, but check out the Microsoft roadmap for that one. That's in the Teams Admin Center. But yeah, I can confirm there's nothing in the API construct for live events in terms of the data coming through or performance.
Cool. And someone's just asked how much does it cost, which is a good question. So it's a per user model, per user per year. So it scales appropriately depending on how big or small you are. If you go SaaS, then we run the Azure and take the Azure cost and maintenance and support and all that kind of stuff. So you just get auto upgraded. If you go with the customer Azure tenant model, then you can deploy it yourselves with an ARM template, or we can help you. And things like upgrades, they're all ARM template driven. So some of our customers are happy to do it themselves. Others want us to help support with that. So, but yeah, per user per year is the high level, and the compute costs in Azure, if you deploy it on your tenants, will be your responsibility. But if you deploy SaaS, then it's just that per user per year. Yeah, and a couple of very specific API questions, but I think we're probably better to address them directly. So we'll pick those up one to one. So I think we're there to keep everybody to time. Thanks very much for joining. We will be sending out the recording and the deck, so you can get to the links. We'd love your feedback, and we'd definitely love to get you testing Teamwork Analytics. So the link is there. You can sign up for a free trial, depending on what you want to do, either SaaS or deploy in your tenant. You'll either get a link to enable it, or you'll get links to the ARM template and some assistance to deploy. So if you're interested at all, please click the link, and Sean will be sending out a follow-up email as well. So if you want to get on a one-to-one session to get into the weeds of a demo and see the details, we'd love to talk to you about that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are.